The night I signed the papers on my first home, I stood alone in the empty kitchen, listening to the echo of my own footsteps on the hardwood floor, and I cried. Not because I was sad, because for the first time in 29 years, not a single thing around me belonged to anyone else. My realtor had popped a small bottle of sparkling wine. My best friend had sent flowers, and my parents, the two people who had watched me scrape together every dollar of that down payment while simultaneously asking me for money to cover their hydro bill, had called to tell me they were planning to move in. Let me back up. I grew up in Sudbury, Ontario, the older of two daughters. My sister Tara was 4 years younger than me, and from the moment she arrived, something shifted in our house that never shifted back. I don't have a clean memory of a before, just a slow accumulation of moments that, looking back now, were never actually ambiguous. They were always telling me exactly who they were. I just kept finding reasons not to hear it. My parents weren't cruel in a dramatic way. There were no screaming matches at the dinner table. My mom was cheerful, actually. Bright lipstick, loud laugh, the kind of woman who made strangers feel immediately at ease. My dad was quieter, handy around the house, loved hockey, could spend 4 hours on a Saturday doing absolutely nothing and feel completely fine about it. Together they were pleasant, and pleasant is a difficult thing to argue against. The thing about Tara was that she was sensitive. That's how my mother always framed it. Tara's sensitive, so we have to be careful. What that meant in practice was that Tara's feelings were seismic events requiring full family mobilization, and mine were inconveniences. When I was 14 and didn't make the school volleyball team, my mother told me to walk it off. When Tara was 12 and didn't get the lead in the school play, my mother kept her home for 3 days and let her eat cereal in bed. I noticed. Of course I noticed. But I also told myself it evened out somewhere. I was the older one. I was tougher. That was just how families worked. What I didn't understand at 14, what took me an embarrassingly long time to understand, was that "you're the tough one" is something parents say to the child they've already decided not to protect. I left for university at 18. Lakehead, in Thunder Bay, studying accounting. I got a partial scholarship and took out OSAP loans for the rest. My parents contributed nothing, which they were upfront about, so I never resented them for it. I picked up a part-time job at a campus coffee shop, then a second job doing data entry for a small property management company 3 evenings a week. I learned to live on rice and lentils and the occasional free muffin from my coworker who felt sorry for me. I was fine. I was genuinely fine. Then, second semester of my second year, my dad called. He'd left his job at the mill. Not been laid off, left. He said it wasn't a good fit anymore. I didn't ask follow-up questions because I was 20 years old and it didn't occur to me that a man in his mid-40s voluntarily leaving a unionized job without another one lined up was something I should be alarmed about. He didn't go back to work. Not that year. Not the next. My mother still worked, part-time at a pharmacy, but what she made didn't cover their mortgage. They had refinanced twice in the years I was in high school, for reasons I only understood later. A deck renovation they didn't need, a truck for my dad that was too expensive, a trip to Vegas that I was told was a business thing, and have since concluded absolutely was not. By the time I was in my 3rd year, they were asking me for money. The first time was $200 for a car repair. I sent it. The second time was $350 for a dental bill. I sent that too. By the time I graduated, I had transferred somewhere between $8,000 and $12,000 to my parents across 4 years, in chunks small enough that I kept being able to tell myself it wasn't that much. It was that much. I moved to Toronto after convocation, got a junior accounting position at a mid-sized firm downtown. The salary wasn't glamorous, $48,000 to start, but I was careful with money in a way that came from years of practice, and I found a rental in Scarborough with 2 roommates and kept my head down. Tara, meanwhile, had done 1 semester of college, dropped out, and moved back home. My mother called this a gap year. It lasted 4 years. During that time, Tara worked occasionally at a nail salon, spent most of what she made on clothes and going out, and contributed nothing to the household financially. My parents paid her phone bill. My parents bought her a car, a used Civic, but still, when I mentioned once that I'd bought my own car in university with money I'd saved from 2 jobs, my mother said, "Well, you were always so independent." I filed that away and didn't say anything else. Here is the part I am least proud of. I kept sending money. Not because I was naive anymore. I knew what was happening. I just couldn't find the door out. Every time I thought about stopping, I pictured my mother's voice, cheerful and wounded in equal measure, saying something like, "We're just going through a hard time, sweetheart. But of course, if you can't manage it." And I would transfer the money to avoid hearing the rest of the sentence. I was promoted twice in 3 years. I started making real money, $74,000, then $91,000. I was good at my job. I had colleagues I liked, a social life I was building slowly, a gym membership I actually used. My life in Toronto was mine in a way my childhood never quite was. The asks from home got bigger. My dad needed a new truck because the old one had given out. Could I help? My mom needed some dental work, and they didn't have coverage anymore, and she was in real pain. Could I help? They were a little behind on the mortgage, just 1 month, just to bridge the gap. Could I help? And every time there was a hint that maybe I should come home for a visit, or that I was being selfish for living my own life 5 hours away, or that family was family, and you didn't turn your back on family. I calculated one February night when I couldn't sleep how much I had sent home since graduating. I had a spreadsheet. Occupational habit. The number was $31,400. I sat with that for a long time. I didn't stop sending money that night, but something loosened in me. Something that had been wound tight for so long I'd stopped feeling it. I started saving, seriously, for a house. I had been putting money away already, but not with real discipline. I kept dipping into it when the calls came. Now I stopped dipping. I set up a separate account, automated the transfers, and treated that money like it didn't exist. It took me 2 more years. I was 31 when I found the place. A semi-detached in East York, older building, needed some cosmetic work. But the bones were good and the price was at the edge of what I could manage without stretching dangerously. I made the offer on a Tuesday. It was accepted Thursday morning. I called my best friend first, then my grandmother on my dad's side, who had always been quietly in my corner and who cried a little on the phone and said she was proud of me. Then, because I felt like I was supposed to, I called my parents. My mother said, "Oh, that's wonderful, sweetheart. How many bedrooms?" I told her 3. There was a pause, and then she said, "So there's room for us." I thought I'd heard her wrong. I said, "Sorry? Your father and I have been talking," she said, and her voice had shifted into the bright, reasonable tone she used when she was presenting something unreasonable as self-evident. "The mortgage here is getting to be a lot, and you know Tara's talking about moving in with her boyfriend, so the house will just be the 2 of us rattling around. It makes so much more sense for us to come to Toronto. We could help with the mortgage." I asked her very carefully how they planned to help with the mortgage. She said they'd work something out. I didn't say anything for a moment. I was standing in my rental apartment, looking at the wall, and I felt something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite grief. It was something more like the moment you finally look down and see the thing that's been sitting on your chest for years. I told her I'd have to think about it and got off the phone. I didn't sleep that night either, but this time I wasn't doing math. I was doing something I probably should have done much earlier, which was asking myself, plainly and without softening anything, what my relationship with my parents actually was. Not what I wanted it to be. Not what it looked like from the outside at Christmas dinner. What it actually was. They had never once asked how I was doing and meant it as a question rather than a preamble. They had never asked about my work, my friends, my apartment, my life in Toronto, unless they were building toward an ask. The last time my mother had said she was proud of me, I was 11, and I had won a math competition at school. In the 20 years since, not a word. Every single time they called, I ended up transferring money or feeling guilty for not transferring money. That was the entire relationship. That was what it had been reduced to, or maybe what it had always been, and I had just been too close to see the shape of it. I met them for dinner the following month. They drove down. I didn't offer to pay for that, and we went to a Greek place in the Danforth neighborhood that I liked. It was a Saturday. The weather was cold but clear. My dad had aged more than I'd noticed in photos, and my mother was wearing a coat I was fairly sure I'd paid for indirectly. We ordered. We talked about Tara's boyfriend, who my mother liked, and my dad's knees, which were giving him trouble, and a show they were watching on Netflix. It felt almost normal, which is one of the more disorienting things about families like mine. The ability to manufacture normal right up until they can't anymore. About halfway through the meal, my mother brought it up again. The house. The plan. They had it mapped out, apparently. They would take the third bedroom. My dad would look into part-time work. She was careful to say look into, not find, and they'd contribute what they could. The rest would be details they'd figure out once they were settled. I put my fork down. I want to be honest about what happened next, because I think people expect a big speech, a dramatic revelation, a moment where everything gets said that's never been said. That's not what happened. I was very calm, which surprised me. Maybe I'd used up the emotion the night I couldn't sleep. Maybe I was just tired of performing the feelings they expected. I told them I wouldn't be doing that. My mother blinked. She said, "What do you mean?" I said the house was mine. I had bought it myself. There was no room in it for the arrangement they were describing. My father said quietly, "That family helps each other out." I looked at him across the table, at this man who had not held a full-time job in over a decade, whose retirement would fall on my shoulders if I let it, who had taken more from me in the past 10 years than he had ever given. And I said, "I know, I've been doing that." It was quiet. The table beside us was laughing at something. A server walked past with a tray of food. My mother said in a voice that had gone very still, "After everything we've done for you." And something in me just let go. I said, "I want you to think about what you've done for me. Actually think about it. And then I want you to think about what I've done for you. And I want you to be honest about those two things, because I've been doing the math for a long time. And the numbers don't say what you think they do." My dad started to say something about respect. My mother started to cry, quietly, in the way she cried when she wanted to be seen crying. I waited until she was done and then I said, "I love you. But I'm not doing this anymore. Not the money, not the guilt, not this plan. The house is mine, and it's going to stay that way." I paid the bill, habit, and I was too tired to fight about it, and I drove home. They called twice that night. I let it go to voicemail. My mother's message said she was disappointed in me. My father's message said nothing, just some breathing, and then a hang-up. Tara texted me to say I was being selfish. I put my phone face down on the counter and stood in my kitchen. My kitchen, in my house. And I breathed. The weeks after that were stranger than I expected. I had braced for the grief, and the grief did come. But what I hadn't expected was the quiet. How much mental space had been occupied for years by managing their feelings, anticipating the next ask, calculating what I could spare, rehearsing the explanations I never quite gave. Without all of that, there was just room. It was almost uncomfortable at first, the amount of room there was. I set some limits with myself about what the new relationship would look like. I would call on birthdays. I would be polite. I would not be a source of money. If the calls became about money, I would end the calls. That was it. I wasn't sure they would want a relationship on those terms, and I made peace with that slowly, over several months. My grandmother called me one Sunday in the spring. She was 78 and still sharp. Still funny. Still the only person in my family who had ever asked what I wanted from my own life. I told her what had happened, or the outline of it. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "I always wondered when you'd figure it out." I asked her what she meant. She said, "You were taking care of them since you were a teenager." I saw it. I didn't know how to say it without making things worse. I didn't say anything for a moment. Then I said, "I wish someone had said it." She said, "I know, I'm sorry." We talked for another hour about nothing in particular. About her garden and a book she was reading and the fact that she'd started doing a crossword puzzle every morning because someone told her it was good for her brain. I sat on the floor of my living room while we talked, back against the wall, looking at the afternoon light coming through the front window. I own that window. I own the light that comes through it. My parents came to the house exactly once that summer. Not to move in, not with a plan, just a Sunday visit that my mother had requested with unusual humility. I said yes because I thought I should. She brought flowers. My dad fixed a loose hinge on the back door without being asked, and I thanked him. We had tea. It was awkward in the way things are awkward when nobody is pretending anymore, but also more honest than any conversation we'd had in years. She didn't ask for money. Neither did he. I don't know if they'd run out of ways to ask, or if they'd found other solutions, or if some part of them understood that the old approach was finished. I didn't ask. I made more tea and we sat in the back garden and my dad talked about the blue jays in the feeder, and my mother commented on the state of the garden beds, and it was ordinary in a way that felt, for once, actually possible to maintain. I don't know what my family looks like from here. I have stopped trying to see it from far enough away that the shape becomes clear. What I know is that my house is mine, my money is mine, my time and my energy, which for so long felt like resources that belonged first to everyone else, those are mine too. I used to think independence was something you built, a job, an apartment, a bank account. I had all of those things for years and I still wasn't independent, because I had never stopped paying the tax on belonging. When I walked through the house on the day I got the keys, alone, listening to my own footsteps, I wasn't thinking about any of this. I was just walking from room to room like a person who lived there, like someone who was allowed to be there simply because she'd chosen to be and for no other reason. That was new. That was the whole thing, really. That it was new and that it shouldn't have been.